At this point, you may be wondering, how has the traveling changed since the pandemic? Or maybe you're just thinking, has it even changed at all? And probably why you're watching this video right now. But in this video, we're gonna be covering some of the things and the changes that have had an impact in the travel industry and some of the things you have to keep in mind if you are someone who wants to travel in the near future. So stick around and let's just dive right in. There's two perspectives when we talk about the travel changes. Now, the first perspective would be the overall view of the industry and travel as a whole. And the second perspective would be the nitty-gritty aspect, the details, the flying, the process during the airport, things like that. So today we'll be covering specifically this side of things, that perspective. And in the next video, we will be covering the details on what you have to do at the airport specifically as well. So, and this is an entire series, playlist, which is called Traveling During the Pandemic. So make sure you binge watch and click somewhere around this screen so that you actually watch the entire playlist. Now, with that being said, I'm going to point out something that not everyone will agree with, and that is, although there are very negative aspects to what the pandemic has brought in the term of the aspects of life and people's lives overall, I believe that there is a positive side to it as well, although a lot of the times it is hard to identify. Thinking about the benefits and the disadvantages of the changes that it has brought, one of the first points that has had a great impact is the actual tourism in itself. Now, I call it the new lens of tourism, and I believe that throughout these changes, like the airlines have been struggling, a lot of countries that depend on tourism have had also some problems because their GDP maybe was highly dependent on that tourism factor or that sector, and we have had to learn to see things in a different way and to actually maybe start to appreciate even tourism in certain aspects, in certain ways. Not every country likes tourism, especially the most exploited ones, but now you get to see a complete contrast of what it is to have zero tourists and thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of tourists every year visiting your country. So you kind of get to see that difference and that perspective. And I think one of the ways that we can consider it being a good impact is to actually have some cleanliness and to have that place that is so visited to get that place to rest at least for a little bit, ecologically speaking, and in many other different ways. But one of the examples that I can think about is Boracay in Philippines. At some point it was very exploited. A lot of Koreans, a lot of people were traveling there, and it was actually shut down. The whole island was shut down for tourism because it was just too damaged and whatnot. And so I think tourism in that perspective will get new lens in how we really see the way that we travel and how we really travel with tourism, with the guides, and how we appreciate the country that we're going to, and also as a country that receives tourists, how we appreciate them coming and how we see the impact they have on our economy. Number two is mobility. The pandemic has also changed the way that we think about traveling. And one of the things is that word, specifically mobility, I think has raised a lot of awareness when it comes to where we can work from. You see, the term working from home or working from anywhere it is so common nowadays that it is really giving the people the chance to actually mix that part of working and pleasure of being able to work while traveling. And this is quite peculiar because although it's been a growing trending over the last year or so, we're not exactly able to travel that much still at this point, but it is something that will happen over the next couple of months as things start getting back to normal. Now, working from home, working from anywhere, working from as long as it is online for a lot of people, it is really changing the way that we do or we think about remote work, and it is changing the whole dynamic in the startup world, in the business world, that you don't have to be in an office anymore. You don't have to spend the whole day in that cubicle. And it has become more flexible overall, allowing people to relax and do whatever they want to do as long as they get the work done. Ever since the pandemic started, I've been having kind of like a joke where I say that location independent entrepreneurs or remote workers have been the same all throughout the pandemic. It's like before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and then after the pandemic, we are still working maybe remotely from laptops at different offices from home. And that flexibility has never really changed. On the other hand, and that is point number three, business travelers are starting to reconsider the importance of actually going somewhere to a different country just for the sake of business meeting itself. And maybe, you know, the thinking maybe it is something that can be just solved over a Zoom call. And there is a joke for that as well, but I once heard it said, if we're not gonna have lunch, might as well just send an email. So there are things that you have to start considering whether they are really important, and maybe you have to go to the place, you have to physically be there, and some of the things that, you know, maybe it is not that necessary anymore. Maybe you could just settle it over Zoom, a video call, whatever it is, just get it done, send me an email, para, right? And that is one of the things that I believe has also been changing the business travel in itself. You don't see that much anymore at the airports. Maybe people that are actually traveling for leisure or traveling to stay longer times, but not people who are there for a very short period of time. Talking about reconsiderations, point number 4 would be that clear distinction between essential and non-essential travel. As you know, people are calling it nowadays, people are trying to find ways to determine whether it is something that they have to do, a trip that they actually have to do, or something that maybe can wait. At this point, waiting, you know, it's been over a year, but waiting, you know, what can it be? A year, 2 years, 3 years, no one knows. And that has driven people to take a different perspective when it comes to the traveling. It's funny, if you're a traveler, you understand this, but a lot of people around already have or already find excuses why not to travel. You know, that there's no money, there's no time, there's no this, stars never align. But you can imagine, even if right now things kind of seem scary out there, people tend to even doubt it, you know, more. It just doesn't seem sensible for them to actually move, to do something, to travel somewhere. And that has also driven people to kind of start looking into the domestic market, into the national aspect of traveling. So instead of going internationally and going to a different country, some of the people are actually trying to just travel closer, more comfortably, somewhere safely, you know, somewhere where they believe they are still in their ground, where they, you know, they're not exposed to unknown things, where they could just come back home in a day or two. They don't have to worry about the travel insurance or other different things that, you know, maybe it requires a way more hassle when you go overseas. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe as well. Your little action can really have a big difference in the channel. Thank you. Come on, just give it a like. Come on, subscribe. Por favore. Okay, numero 5 would be complexity in travel. With so much uncertainty and so many things changing constantly, every country has developed their own way of doing things, and you have to keep up. It's very hard to just stay updated with every single different thing that every country is requiring. And while you could have a visa free, maybe you could enter in that country normally, maybe at this point, if you don't have the specific things that you require, it is becoming more complex. And so of course that requires fees. You have the health check, the PCR test, the whatever thing, the imposed quarantine, so many things that maybe are unexpected and can definitely change the way that the whole experience, how much you spend as well. And so when it comes to that, I think a lot of travelers and a lot of digital nomads have stopped traveling so much because these imposed quarantines and high prices, high fees in order to stay in the quarantine hotels, it's something that they simply cannot afford. And so if you don't have the money, if you don't have the preparation, you don't have the right documents, traveling will become like a hassle more than just fun. And that leads me to number 6, which is 6 in Chinese. Considering that people really have to stay for longer periods of time, or maybe have that imposed quarantine, travel seems to be slowing down. I personally believe that slowing down is a good thing because a lot of the people are just constantly hopping around, just jumping from country to country, and don't really get to see, connect, and integrate into that culture, into that country itself. So it always depends whether it is positive or negative. It is really a subjective topic. But one of the things that has, you know, the industry has brought this, because if you're traveling somewhere, maybe you have to stay at least 14 days for you to be able to go out, for you to be able to really visit the city and actually start your journey or your trip in that country. So it is really not as convenient as it used to be, and that requires people to stay longer, even apply for longer visas, and also for maybe immigration to become more picky when it comes to choosing who they allow into the country and who they don't. If you are just visiting there, you're not really bringing that much money, you're not doing business, you're not staying for long, maybe that will become something that in the end of the day starts making a difference between tiers of passports and also priority when it comes to what you go do in that country. So, but the slow travel overall, I believe, is a good way so that you can stay longer. The governments are also raising new policies and creating new visas for those type of travelers. If you want to stay longer in the country due to the pandemic, if you want to be able to go somewhere, maybe you have an imposed quarantine, but then you can stay for even longer periods of time, which to your advantage will be something good if you really want to be able to integrate, to learn the language, to connect with people, to really develop certain network there instead of just being a long-term tourist. Given the nature of what's happening around the world, it seems like there's also been a new surge of a travel modality, let's call it. And this implies that people are starting to travel in very different ways. While maybe before it was very common to have a group tour, massive amounts of people just fluxing into different places and traveling all together, just gathering all around, it seems like people are starting to be more careful when it comes to where they are, where they go to, where they spend their time. Try not to mingle so much. And so this has really been rising the industry when it comes to private tours and self-guided type of traveling, whether it is just by yourself with a backpack, maybe you trying to find a way, maybe actually hiring someone who takes you there without necessarily being in contact with a lot of other people. That way, keeping tourists in somewhat you can call like a bubble, like a tourist bubble, which is already a thing when it comes to a lot of the travelers that really don't mingle into the country. But talking about bubbles, there's also new considerations between countries where they seem to be working on a term called travel bubble, which is simply an agreement between two countries where they know that they have safe travel between them, maybe the flux of flights or things inbound and outbound, so that it really becomes easier in terms of mobility. One of the examples would be Singapore and Australia. Apparently they have some kind of agreement signed already or something like that. So if you're interested in hearing more about travel bubbles, just Google it. It is something that is coming up nowadays. But that is point number 7. After traveling myself recently, I've also noticed a growing amount of people not only starting to travel again, but that growing desire of wanting to travel, especially for people who didn't travel for a year or more than a year. It is definitely something that concerns us as we want to travel, but I personally believe that we are literally looking at an industry being reinvented, reborn, revolutionized, and it is happening right now. But the fact is, regardless of when the things start reopening again and when we go back to normal, we will certainly need something more than just our passport to travel. I hope you've enjoyed this video so far, and I'd love to hear what your biggest takeaway is. And also, question of the day: what do you believe is the greatest impact, the greatest change that the travel industry has had since the pandemic? Let me know down below, and I'll see you soon.